Have you ever wondered who is the I that thinks your thoughts? Or where that voice inside your head that comments on everything you do comes from? And yes, even though at first it may sound a little crazy, that you who is trying to find the truth outside is actually the greatest obstacle to accessing it. Krishnamurti once said, "When the observer realizes he is the observed, understanding is born." This idea, as subtle as it is transformative, invites us to radically break with the way we perceive ourselves. And we are not just talking about a mental trick or a pretty phrase to post on a spiritual social network. We are talking about a shift in perspective that can turn your existence upside down and, maybe for the first time, truly set it on its feet. All of us at some point carry the weight of a suffocating self-consciousness. That feeling of being judged, not by others, but by ourselves. You act, and immediately the voice appears. That was good. That was bad. That was appropriate. That inner narrator is like a sports commentator for a game he himself invented. And the most impressive thing is that despite all that inner noise, we still believe that this is who we are. But what if that voice is just background noise? And what if the real you is the one who listens, silent, attentive, always present, but never giving an opinion? What would happen if you stopped trying to silence that voice and instead began to observe who is listening? This video is a journey, not to a new place, but towards a deep recognition. What you are looking for is what you are. The consciousness that tries to understand the world is the same that manifests the world. And upon realizing this, maybe, just maybe, something silent will awaken, something that has always been there. Let's go together to the heart of this enigma. And who knows, by the end, you might no longer need answers, because the questions will have dissolved. Most people who begin an inner path make a fundamental and understandable mistake. They close their eyes and try to observe themselves. They believe that this internal voice that comments on everything is the true observer, but it is not. This confusion is so common that even experienced meditators can spend years trapped in it. It's like trying to silence a room full of people by shouting for silence. The mind imitates itself so well that it ends up deceiving itself. This mistake has a name and a form. The inner commentator manifests mainly in three ways: the narrator, the critic, and the cheerleader. It's that voice that tells you you are doing well or badly during meditation. It's the one that narrates your day like a movie, blames you when things go wrong, and exalts you when you succeed. But above all, it's the one that is always trying to define you. And the curious thing is that it feels separate from your everyday life, like a serene entity floating above events. But this is nothing more than another performance. It's the ego disguised as wisdom. Imagine for a moment that you are in a cafe, conversations in the background, cups clinking, someone laughing loudly at a distant table. Now imagine that instead of paying attention to your own coffee, you focus only on the voices around you. The inner commentator is just that, background noise you mistook for your own essence. It seems like an observer, but it is only an echo. It does not see, it merely reacts. The true observer, on the other hand, is mute. It does not think. It does not judge. It does not say, this is good or this is bad. It simply is. It watches the inner commentator in action, notices its comings and goings, but it does not intervene, not out of indifference, but because it has understood that none of those voices defines you. As Krishnamurti wrote, the observer is the observed. And when that perception happens, separation disappears. The commentator is a product of the mind, and therefore the fruit of your personal history. It feeds on your insecurities, desires, traumas, and memories. It is conditioned, shaped by childhood, by culture, by fears and dreams, whose origins you no longer even remember. And that is why it is so inconsistent. One day it calls you a failure, the next a genius, always oscillating, always unstable. That's why it's so difficult to realize that this voice is not you because it sounds intimate. It knows your most secret pains. But intimacy is not identity, and just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's true. The revelation happens when, for the very first time, You experience that strange silence between one thought and another, when, in the middle of a breath, everything stops for a second. In that brief, perhaps imperceptible instant, you are not thinking, but you are aware. You are not commenting, you are simply present. That is the observer, the one who witnesses the inner storm without trying to avoid it, who sees fear without hiding, who sees love without clinging, who sees sadness without trying to expel it. It is in that space where true transformation happens. Because once you realize that the commentator is not you, you stop fighting it. And the most curious thing is that when you stop fighting, it too falls silent. And in that silence, you find yourself. The most common mistake is to seek the observer as something separate, as a refuge. But it is not a place. It is the very space where everything happens. And once recognized, there is nothing more to do. As Alan Watts said, you don't need to struggle to be yourself. You already are. If that sounds liberating, it's because it is. But it is also only the beginning. There is something profoundly unsettling when you start to realize that the most essential part of you has no voice, no opinion, no judgments. It simply observes. The true observer does not need to convince, correct, or justify. It does not interfere. It does not try to control. It is simply present, like the sky that receives all clouds without ever becoming one. This observer is silence, but not an empty or dead silence. It is a living silence full of presence. It is there when you feel anger, when you laugh at a joke, when you fall in love, or when you are afraid. It is right here, right now, as you listen to these words. But it is not the one thinking about what is being said. It is the one seeing the thought react. This is where many people give up, because the mind, always eager to define and control, wants to understand the observer, wants to label it, to name it, to fit it into a theory, to discuss over Sunday lunch. But the observer cannot be captured in words, not because it is complex, but because it is too simple. It is so close, so fundamental, that the mind slips when it tries to grasp it. Maybe that's why so many spiritual masters contradict themselves when trying to describe it. For some, it is God. For others, it is the void. Some say it is the soul. Others call it pure consciousness. Krishnamurti said it was the state of choiceless awareness itself. The Upanishads call it Atman, the eternal self, the silent witness of all experiences. Buddhists speak of Rigpa, the naked presence beyond time. And for Stoics like Marcus Aurelius, the secret was to observe your own thoughts as if you were someone else, from the outside, with calm and clarity. In every tradition, the observer appears under a different name, but the experience is the same, a state of consciousness that sees everything without becoming anything. And here lies the beauty of it. When you realize that the observer is silence, you discover that silence is not the absence of life. It is its very essence. Noise, thoughts, emotions, they all come and go. But the silence that perceives those movements remains. It is not something you believe. It is something you recognize. Do you remember that moment when you were completely absorbed, staring at the sea, gazing into a fire, or listening to a song that made you forget yourself for a few moments? That state of silent enchantment was the observer revealing itself, not as something separate, but as you without the layers. And that is why it is universal. The observer who sees your thoughts now is the same that witnessed the thoughts of Buddha, of a Tibetan monk, of a child playing alone, or of someone lost in their thoughts on the Tokyo subway. The experience that passes is unique, but the space that observes is the same. That silent awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything without being tainted by anything. And the more you become familiar with that silence, the more you realize that everything you thought you were, name, story, desires, fears, are just temporary forms, passing over the unmoving background of your presence. The mind screams, the observer listens. The mind analyzes, the observer simply sees. The mind wants to solve. The observer simply is. You do not need to make an effort to be that observer. You already are. What you need is to recognize the moments when you get lost in the commentator and gently return to the silence that observes. And maybe in that process, you will realize that what you have always sought, peace, freedom, meaning, was never out there. It was in the gap between one thought and another, in the silence between two words, in the space between you and the world. The question is no longer, how do I find the observer? But why do I insist on forgetting it? There is a strange, almost unnameable experience that we have all had, but are rarely aware of. It is that sensation that, although everything has changed in you over the years, body, tastes, ideas, certainties, something has remained the same. The gaze behind the eyes, the silent presence that has witnessed everything from childhood until now. What is that which never grows old within us? It is there that we begin to touch the timeless aspect of the observer. Think about it. When you were 5 years old and looked at the world, there was a feeling of I am. Today, decades later, that feeling of existence is still there, untouched. You may have changed radically, but something within you has remained the same. That something does not belong to time. It does not move with the seasons of life. It observes the changes, but does not change with them. Krishnamurti said, the observer is the observed. Because when you realize there is no separation between the one who sees and what is seen, you transcend duality. There is no longer subject and object. There is only consciousness witnessing itself in multiple forms. And at that point, every idea of identity dissolves. That awareness has no name, no age, no past, and no future. It is the space where time occurs, but remains unaffected by it. Philosopher Alan Watts compared it to a jazz dance. There is no central conductor, only a living, fluid improvisation with no fixed direction, but perfectly coherent. The observer is that silence in the background of the music. This idea is so powerful that it crosses cultures and eras. In the Upanishads, sacred Hindu texts, it reads, the inner self is unmoving, yet it moves all. It is far away, yet very near. It is inside everything, yet also outside everything. Christian tradition speaks of the kingdom of God within you. Zen Buddhism points to your original face before your parents were born. In all these teachings, there is an invitation to recognize the eternal amidst the ephemeral. But why does this matter? Because recognizing that timeless aspect within you radically changes the way you deal with pain, attachment, and the fear of death. When you realize that your essence is not trapped in time, you understand that what dies in you, your stories, your roles, your masks, was never truly you. It was content, not the container. Most of our anguish arises from the attempt to preserve what is impermanent. We cling to memories, to people, to ideas about ourselves, like someone trying to hold water in their hands, but everything slips away. And suffering comes from the attempt to control the uncontrollable. The observer, on the other hand, does not try to retain anything. It simply observes, lets things pass, and remains. That is true freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being dragged by what you are not. The writer Eckhart Tolle, resonating with this perception, said, "You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who listens to it." And here, something even more radical comes in. The observer is not yours. It is not private property, nor a spiritual identity to be conquered. It is the same in everyone. What changes is the content that passes, thoughts, emotions, experiences, but the space that perceives it all is one and the same. That is why, when recognizing the observer, something within you relaxes. Barriers fall. The separation between you and the other begins to appear as an illusion. The same silence that observes in you is the one that observes in the other. The same immutable background behind your eyes is behind everyone's eyes. It's what mystics call universal consciousness. You do not need to believe in this. It is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of seeing, of sitting silently and observing until separation dissolves, until time stops, until only presence remains. As a Zen master said, "Before awakening, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During awakening, mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. After awakening, mountains are once again mountains and rivers are once again rivers." When you see with the eyes of the observer, Everything remains the same, but nothing is as before. We reach the point where everything converges. What would it be like to live from that silent place? Not as a spiritual concept, not as a nice idea for moments of crisis, but as a living practice. What if, instead of trying to change the content of your mind, you simply recognize the space that allows everything to exist? Living from the observer is abandoning the addiction to reaction. It is when something happens, a criticism, a compliment, a painful memory, and you are not immediately swept away by the emotional current, not because you have become cold or indifferent, but because something in you has learned not to confuse itself with what appears. It is like sitting on the riverbank and watching leaves float by. Some are beautiful, others are dirty. Some are frightening, others are nostalgic. But you do not jump into the river to catch any of them. You simply observe. And by observing clearly, you act wisely. The observer is not passivity. It is conscious presence that allows action free of the ego. That freedom is real. It happens in the moment you realize you no longer need to defend yourself from yourself. How many times have you felt imprisoned by obsessive thoughts, by emotions that seem bigger than you? And if, instead of fighting them, you simply looked at them without judgment, without hurry, without trying to fix them, it is in that space where transformation happens. Not because you tried to change, but because you stopped identifying. And here is the most beautiful point. The more you live from the observer, the more compassionate you become, because you begin to see that others too are trapped in their own inner commentators. They too are reacting to old stories, trying to protect fragile identities. And when you understand that, a profound understanding arises, a kind of tenderness for human suffering. It is not a feeling of superiority, but of brotherhood. The anger of the other becomes understandable. The pain of the other moves you, because what observes in them is the same that observes in you. As Rumi wrote, "Beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there." That presence begins to change everything. You truly listen. You begin to respond instead of react. You feel life more vividly, the light entering through the wall, the smell of coffee, the sound of unexpected laughter. Living from the observer is rediscovering simplicity. It is finding peace without needing to escape. It is being whole, even when everything seems to be in pieces. And the beauty of this is that it does not require you to become someone new. You do not need to abandon your life, your commitments, your personality. What changes is not what you live, but from where you live it. Before, you were the actor trapped in their role. Now you are the stage that holds the entire play. As Zen wisdom says, sit, observe, do nothing. The world reveals itself. Living from the observer is living without losing yourself. It is remembering moment after moment that you are the space, not the content. The awareness, not the thought. The sky, not the clouds. And from that place, everything becomes lighter. Not because problems disappear, but because you stop carrying them with your mind. They come, they exist, and they go, and you remain. You have always been there. You always will be. Throughout this video, we have traveled a silent path, perhaps the most silent of all, the path of turning toward oneself, but not toward that conditioned self full of stories and memories. Toward the one who observes everything without ever being touched. The one who is there now, as you breathe, as you think, as you feel, and who has always been there. The truth is that you do not need to reinvent yourself. You only need to remember. And that is not a process of effort, but of surrender, like a leaf that stops resisting the wind and simply dances. The observer is the dance and the silence between the steps. It does not seek to be found. It only needs to be noticed. Now, I want to offer you something that is not for everyone, but it is for you who have come this far, seeking deeper answers about who you are and where your life is going. I created something beyond a book. I built a map for the soul, a manual that unites science, philosophy, and critical thinking to help you break mental patterns, question your identity, and rebuild yourself from the root. This is not an ebook of pretty phrases. It is a guide for those who can no longer endure living on autopilot. If you feel that something inside you is asking for change, for evolution, for clarity, then this is your moment. Click on the pinned comment and access the Manual of Self-Transformation now. Do not read it out of curiosity. Read it because your life depends on it. And if you decide to start this journey, you will not be the same at the end of the path. The journey does not end here. In fact, it has not even begun, because the starting point is the destination itself. You will not find the observer in some enlightened future or by reaching any kind of spiritual perfection. It is here now, in this very instant, when you allow yourself simply to be. And if there is one doubt remaining, let it be this: who within me is the one doubting? Now, before closing, I want to open my heart for a moment. A few years ago, on an ordinary morning, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my mind a whirlwind, fears, decisions, a tangle of mental voices that would not stop. It was at that moment, completely unintentionally, that everything turned to silence. For a brief instant, something in me simply observed the chaos and did nothing. It did not judge. It did not try to fix it. It just saw. And in that second I understood, I'm not all that passes. That was the beginning of an irreversible change. Since then, silence has been my greatest teacher. And that is what I share here with you. Not a theory, but a lived experience. If you have made it this far, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for opening a space within yourself to question, to reflect, and maybe, just maybe, to recognize yourself a little more. Now, before the algorithm pulls us away from this presence, subscribe to the channel. Yes, I know, it may not seem to fit with deep contemplation, but even silent seekers need a strategic click. Leave us a comment with the moment that moved you the most. Who knows? Maybe your silent perception will inspire someone lost in the noise. Like this video, the button is there waiting like a good observer. And check out the videos that are appearing on the screen now. One speaks of something you do not yet know you need to hear. The other, well, it is almost like looking into a mirror and seeing something new. You are not alone. You never have been. See you in the silence.